I'm fired up and I'm ready to go. I'm fired up and I'm ready to go. I'm fired up and I'm ready to go. This is the Billionaire Brown experience. Let's go. Well, welcome back to another episode of the Billionaire Brown experience. I'm Billionaire Brown. Today we have on the other side Mitch Russo. Mitch, say hello to everyone.
Hey guys, nice to be here. Thank you, Mr. Brown.
All right, there we go. And Mitch is, you'll hear more about resultsbreakthrough.com. So if you want to go check them out right now as you're listening to the podcast, feel free to do that. And Mitch, what we always like to do when we first get started is find out how you got into what you're currently into.
Okay, well, I have a great story to tell you. I think you'll enjoy hearing it.
Let's do it.
Okay. So I had a rock band in high school. And the reason I had the rock band is because I was so shy, I could never approach girls. So my logic said, well, if you build a rock band, then actually it'd be probably pretty easy to pick up girls. So I started to, and then I was only 12 years old. I started to practice and learn guitar. And I spent 3 years learning how to play the guitar. And by around 15 years old, I started a rock band. And in that period of time, from 15 to 16, we basically went from the basement of my mom's little house to become the highest grossing high school rock band in the entire area, in the Brooklyn, New York area. So it was very exciting. It was a lot of fun. I met a lot of nice girls and had a ball. But there was the downside to that, and I want to share that with you. The downside was that I became addicted to heroin. And in high school, I was shooting heroin every day, and it was a pretty bad time in life for me. Even though I was having fun in the band, I had lost a lot of weight, and it was starting to show. My folks found out, and they sent me for rehab. And I must say that it looked pretty grim, but it turned out that rehab was one of the most amazing times of my life. I was able to deal with a lot of the issues that you have as a kid and emerge from rehab a strong, healthy adult, even at the age of 18. I was 17 and a half when I finally got out of rehab, and I restarted my life. I went back to high school. I finished and got my degree, and that was the beginning of me being an adult and a responsible adult.
Okay, so a couple questions for you that I wanted to unpack real quick. One is, how addicted were you to heroin?
How addicted? Let's put it this way. I mentioned before I was the highest grossing rock band in Brooklyn. Every penny that we made, and we were making a fortune for kids. We were generating $500 a night back in 1971. So back then I was spending every dollar that came out of that band went right into my arm.
Hey, what about your other band members? Were they doing the same thing or no?
Well, most were. I would say half of us were. Two of us together were partners in this stuff. The other two guys had their own issues, but the drummer, Doug, and I were shooting up regularly every day, several times a day sometimes.
Okay, and did you check yourself into rehab, or did someone, were you forced into?
I was kind of forced into it. My mom found my kit in the rafters of the ceiling in my basement, and she brought me home. I was away. She brought me back and rushed me into a New York doctor. And when I went to see that doctor basically told my mother that everything I was about to tell him is a lie. And of course, he was right. I was a junkie. So in effect, he would say to me, well, Mitch, are you using drugs now? And I'd say, well, no, I'm not doing that anymore. And he would then tell my mom, see, I told you so. He's a junkie. He's going to lie. Everything comes out of his mouth's a lie. And again, he was right. And so at that moment in time, my mom agreed to admit me on the spot into rehab. And I was kind of forced into it, but I also realized I needed it.
And so did you relapse, or was that just one and done?
Well, it was an 18-month program. I could have left any time, but I knew I could never move back home. My mom would not allow me back in the house until I graduated. So you might say it was one and done. It was also the hardest thing I ever did in my life, even to this day.
Rehab?
Rehab.
Hardest thing you've ever done?
Ever.
What about it was so, what about rehab was so hard?
I had to confront myself. I had to confront the inner demons that brought me to where I was at that time in my life. And I was working with high-level counselors who would take me through these processes that were very, 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 very emotionally draining and difficult. And I had to bare my soul at a level that I had never done before. So for me back then, I mean, I was in basically 3 groups a day. And we were doing an experimental process. It was called primal screaming. It was a primal screaming process. And the doctor who had invented it was Dr. Dan Casriel, and I was at his institute. So we were being pushed, all of us were being pushed every day, really, really hard. And during the day, we were doing, menial jobs, menial work, cleaning baseboards and scrubbing toilets as our daily activities, because their belief was that we couldn't be trusted with anything beyond that. So I dropped out of school in order to be in this program. And when I say it was hard, I mean that it made me grow up, and I went kicking and screaming, but it was difficult. And all I could say is that I was one of the lucky ones. It turns out that I bonded with one of the counselors there. His name was Chester. Chester was a 6'5", huge Norwegian man who had a bodybuilder's build, and he was my closest friend in the program. He was my guide, and I felt like everything I was doing was to impress Chester. And after I graduated, of course, he was very proud of me. And about 6 weeks later, I called up to speak to him, and I found out that he had died. He had gone back to heroin, and he had overdosed. So when I say it was hard, physically it's hard, but it's, I had to detox too. So that was hard. And the detox period was very short. It was basically about a week. But after that, I still had all of the demons that junkies have. And, to answer the longer term question that you asked is, I have never gone back to drugs. I have, occasionally have a glass of cheap wine with dinner, but drugs don't appeal to me. I never, ever went back. And to this day, I've been clean and sober. And it's, frankly, let me think now, it's 40, I hate to say it, it's actually 42 years that I'm clean and sober.
Wow, that's awesome. So congratulations to you, and also my condolences to your friend Chester there.
Yeah, yes, thank you.
Absolutely. And I'm pretty sure everybody is probably wondering, whatever happened to Doug? Did Doug continue using, or?
That's a very sad topic for me. Doug and I'll never forget this day. I didn't expect this podcast to go in this direction, so I'm just doing my best here. Doug and I were shooting up under the staircase of his mother's apartment building years early on in the time that we were still using. And Doug turned to me and he said, I had a dream last night, and my dream was that you kicked the habit and you became a super successful guy, and you helped a lot of other people and you made a lot of money, and I died a junkie. And Doug died a junkie.
Wow. Sorry to hear that. At what point, was it early while after you went to rehab?
It was after I went to rehab of course, while in rehab, I had no access to phones, or I didn't have any way to communicate with anybody. And it was encouraged that I don't communicate with anybody while in rehab.
Yeah.
So it was after rehab that I discovered that Doug had passed away.
Oh, man. All right. So, man, that's really powerful. Let's switch gears just for a second. Because I know that you're also, the reason why I was asking you, that's the hardest thing that you've ever done is go to rehab, because I know I was reading in your bio that you've worked with individuals like Tony Robbins, which a lot of our listeners are very, very familiar with. Some of us have been to his seminars and his firewalks and his workshops and listened to his audios and all of that good stuff. So you were also, did we read it correct? You're CEO of Tony Robbins and what he was doing?
Tony Robbins, myself, and Chet Holmes built a company together called Business Breakthroughs International, and I was the CEO and president of that company.
So Tony Robbins, just on the outside, I've never met him personally, but Tony Robbins seems like a high energy, no nonsense, and like he's like a Steve Jobs, like where it seems like he would be down and rough on his partners.
No, Chet was rough on his partners. Tony was demanding, but he was never rough. Tony is the highest level of gentleman that I can think of. Smartest guy I know as well. Tony was my mentor. Chet was my mentor for 5 years as we worked together. I believe I brought a lot to the table, which is why they chose me to be their partner. But when I interacted with Tony, he was nothing but respectful and always kind, but always demanding. And I appreciated that, and I totally respected that. And I performed at a higher level because I knew that's what he wanted, and that's what he was looking for.
And as a CEO, what was your job? Like, what was your thing that you were responsible for in that whole building, that empire? As a CEO, I'm responsible for everything. I basically the buck stops here. So I was responsible for revenue. I was responsible for the productivity of all the marketing. We had 300 people working with us directly or indirectly. I was responsible for setting up all the hiring systems. I created 2 divisions, the recruiting division and the client services division. I structured the sales programs along with Chet, and I managed all millions and millions of dollars worth of radio advertising every year. So I took total responsibility for just about every executive action that took place in that company. And we grew that company 100% a year. We grew it to $25 million in revenue. And then my friend Chet died. And when Chet passed away, Chet died of leukemia. Sorry to hear that. He died from what?
Leukemia. Leukemia is a cancer of the blood disease. And actually, he died of a complication related to leukemia. And when he died, I realized that chapter was now closing in my life. And it was a time for me, and I spoke to Tony extensively about this, and he agreed that it was time for me at this point to move on, and I did. And that's when I wrote my book, The Invisible Organization.
Okay, so I want to talk about the book also, but I know some of us, including myself, are thinking, how did you went from a junkie to that the dichotomy between a junkie and working with Tony Robbins is like huge. How did you know them?
Yeah, well, I mean, let me take you through a little bit more granular detail of the process. So after I graduated at Rehab, which was the name of the rehab center that I went to, I went out and I got a job. And, I was counseled at the time that you only need 3 things to be successful in life. You need a job, you need a girlfriend, which means you need to know how to have a human relationship with the opposite sex, and you need a place to live and a way to sustain yourself. So I worked very hard to get those 3 things. And when I did, I wasn't happy. And I started asking questions like, is that all there is? Because honestly, drugs was better. I mean, this is kind of boring, actually. I can't drink. I can't get high. Yeah, I got a girlfriend. Yeah, she's nice and I like her. Yeah, I got a shitty car and a crappy apartment. And this is what life is supposed to be. And I mean, it wasn't enough. And I went searching. And that began my spiritual path. And that is how over many years, I really started to find myself outside of the outside physical world which led me to much of the things that I've studied and learned. In fact, it led me to study